Have you ever wondered why quitting smoking feels like such a battle? Like a part of you wants to stop, but another part just won't let go? It's not a physical addiction to nicotine as much as it is your mind actually playing tricks on you. It has much more to do with patterns in the same way that people reach for their phone when you're bored or when you reach for popcorn during a movie. And in the same way patterns can be set, patterns can also be broken. And in this video, we're going to talk about exactly how to break those patterns without using willpower or constantly struggling. As I just mentioned, patterns are what keeps smoking behaviors alive. And as many of you have probably already heard about this example, we can talk about Pavlov's dog and classical conditioning. This is such an important example and experiment that was done back in the 1900s that is constantly cited. So you probably already heard about this example, but for those of you that aren't aware, what Pavlov ended up showing is the nature of what he called classical conditioning, which is basically learning through associations. So what he did, and this is on accident actually, is that he had these dogs in his lab and he would feed them, and every time he would feed them, he would ring a bell. Now, what he ended up noticing was that just at the sound of the bell, after many different pairings between the food and the bell, after just hearing the bell, the dogs would start to salivate. And he started to realize that the bell was triggering the association to food. And unconsciously, the dogs started to salivate because they were expecting food to show up at the sound of the bell. Now, this is very, very important information when it comes to smoking because when you're smoking, you're pairing smoking with different times of the day to the point where those times and events, such as drinking coffee, such as after a meal, such as during breaks, or even when you're bored, those events now start to trigger the cravings for cigarette because they've been paired so many times over the course of years. So this pattern that's been set is far more the reason why people start to crave cigarettes during the day. Now, we can take the opposite example of this. Most people, especially in these later generations, have never and cannot smoke on airplanes. Now, this is so when people get on airplanes nowadays, they are able to go hours without having any cravings of a cigarette, or at least much, much milder than after or with a pair with a coffee, for example. So, or a swimming pool. Most people don't smoke in swimming pools. So when people go swimming, they have no cravings for cigarettes. Or in a movie theater, most people have no cravings whatsoever for hours while watching a movie. And it's only after they step outside that the craving starts to hit. It's because there's no association to smoking in these environments. So because those patterns are set, we have to start to loosen those patterns and break them. And I always tell my clients that it's not so much about, forcing yourself to, quit smoking using willpower, because that often just leads to a backfire effect where inevitably the cravings hit much harder at some point down the future. Instead, what I tell my clients is that it's like when you're a kid and you have a pair of shoes that no longer fit you, it isn't a struggle to, get new shoes. You just realize because the shoe was tight around your feet that it was time to get a new pair of shoes. It wasn't a very emotional event, right? You just, let your parents know that the shoes are too tight and you just went and got a new pair, right? In the same way, smoking is squeezing a lot more than shoes ever have squeezed, right? They're squeezing your lungs and they're squeezing your arteries and your blood pressure and the capillaries in your eyes. And smoking is squeezing so much. And it's time to just let that go, right? It's no longer an identity that serves you anymore, right? Nobody's actually a smoker, right? In the sense that uh, only people who are on fire are literally smoking, right? Nobody's a smoker. Nobody's born a smoker. And the identity of being a smoker is just an old identity that no longer serves you. It's like taking that pair of shoes off because it's no longer something that fits, right? It doesn't have to be a very emotionally, it doesn't have to be an exhausting event. Like using willpower is an exhausting, way of quitting, right? It might work for a sliver of people, but is an exhausting way of quitting. You might as well just take off that identity and put it aside because it no longer serves you. And of course, people have it in their mind that smoking is an addiction, right? Like to nicotine. But the fact of the matter is nicotine is out of your system within 24 to 48 hours. And what's left are these patterns, these habits, right? And thinking about smoking as a habit is a much more powerful way to quit because an addiction is a scary word and brings up a lot of negative associations, right? And a lot of associations of difficulty and so forth. But habits are much easier to break, and so it's a better and more helpful way to think about smoking is in the lens of it being a habit. And it's also, when people quit smoking, it doesn't when you're a non-smoker, you don't have to go around thinking that you're a non-smoker in the sense that I don't roller skate. I don't go around thinking myself as a non-roller skater, right? It's not something that's relevant to me anymore, or it never was relevant to me. But when you become a non-smoker, it's just something that's irrelevant. You don't have to go around waving a flag telling everybody you're a non-smoker. You don't, you're just something that is completely separate from who you are, right? So it's very it's not something you have to go around thinking all the time. I'm a non-smoker. It just put it away, cast it aside, and in the same way, you might not be a skydiver, or maybe you are, but if you're not, then you don't go around thinking of yourself, I'm not a skydiver, right? I'm not a roller skater, right? It's silly. It's not something that you think about. And as something that I want you to start to do is notice the patterns, notice your triggers of smoking. Where do you tend to smoke most? Is it during breaks at work, or is it with your with meals and drinks? Whatever it is, I want you to really notice what your patterns are, what your triggers are to smoking. And if this video is something that resonates with you, then go ahead and click subscribe, follow me here, and I will be releasing more and more content relating to quitting smoking every single day. And I will see you next time.